So there's an interesting thread going on over on Blue Sky. We used to call it Law Twitter. What do we call it now? Law Sky? Help me out with that one. There's an interesting thread going on with Catherine Tewson, a legal analyst, well respected. After spending more than an hour on the phone with Microsoft support, I have learned, 1, it is impossible to disable Copilot in OneNote, Excel, PowerPoint, or Windows itself. 2, it will not become possible to do so for at least another month at the earliest. And this is a great question and great timing for this question because you may or may not know, Microsoft recently changed the name of Microsoft Office to Microsoft 365 with Copilot, because now Copilot is mandatory, is turned on for everyone in all of their documents. And now Copilot is on for everyone in Microsoft Word. This brings some interesting consequences for people who have privacy concerns like doctors, lawyers, clergy, basically anyone who has a fiduciary duty to a client or a requirement to keep client confidential information confidential now needs answers to these questions about how Copilot processes the data, not just in the cloud, but also on their local machine. So Catherine understandably wants to know whether Copilot ingests organizational data via the systems and applications it's embedded into, even when not invoked. Is such ingested data able to bleed over into files other than those it was sourced from? Microsoft was very clear that organizational data would not be used to train the foundational models, but couldn't rule out the possibility that it could never leave our organization in some way or pass beyond our custody and control. And responses from others on Blue Sky are concerned. My own testing suggests that it leaks like a sieve and ingests everything. What's the concern? What's the concern from a confidentiality standpoint? Most lawyers have a series of folders. Think of files in file cabinets. If you're old school, think of maybe just a flat set of client folders in a secured folder, either on a computer or in a secured cloud drive. Each lawyer has to take care of their own security and is held to those standards by their state bar. The main question with generative AI, now being built into our document tools, is whether it will use information it has learned from one client file to inform another document in another client file at all. And if it's doing it at all, how do we prevent it from doing it with confidential information that can't cross over? Lawyers cannot work for two clients who have a concurrent conflict of interest, but we can work for two clients who have a conflict of interest not concurrently. But we can't use client confidential information from one client to inform for another client. I can't use what I learned about one hotel property deal to inform a different client hotel property deal if that information is confidential and non-public. You may have even seen in Better Call Saul how when he was living with Kim Wexler, a lawyer from a competing firm, they didn't talk about the confidential information within their cases except when they knew that they were talking about the confidential information in their cases. And you can see that dynamic play out if you know that when you're watching for it. And that's one of the reasons why lawyers enjoyed watching that show, was because it was fairly accurate about how lawyers get in trouble with their ethics and try to work around those problems unethically. But back to our thread, it gets more interesting. Somewhere down here, Ben Schorr inserts a comment that no, it isn't. Copilot is not still hoovering up your data, vacuuming up your data to feed its LLM no matter what you do. And he links to a support article which says that Copilot only makes use of the content in the file that you're working on or content in another file that you ask it to look at. When you ask Copilot to help you rewrite a paragraph in a Word document, or when you ask Copilot to generate a to-do list. In some apps, you may see your activity history even after you close and reopen the app. You can choose your privacy settings. Your ability to use Copilot features depends on two settings: experiences that analyze content and all connected experiences. You can turn off either of those settings, you can't use Copilot features in these apps. Okay, great. That's a decent answer to the question. If I go back to Word here, and it wanted me to go to privacy settings, it's under General. So in that privacy settings dialog box, we turn off basically everything. Turn off diagnostic data, turn off experiences that analyze your content, download your content, connected experiences, and personalized offers, and click OK. And then it will restart Office. So that's one way to turn it off, it looks like. But back to our story. Catherine notices that the Microsoft support representative told her something different. Ben says, if support told you that Copilot is training the LLM on your data, then they're mistaken. Prompts, responses, and your file contents aren't used to train foundational models. Great, but that does not help us understand what and how much bleeds between documents on our own computer, which means I have 100 client files in a folder. I work on one client file, and then later I work on a different client file. Does it bring any data from that previous client file and then suggest things for the new client file? Well, of course it does. That's its job. If you're making a settlement agreement, if you're making a contract, if you're drafting a deed, if you're drafting a will, there's going to be repeating language and repeating formats. And of course the LLM can learn that. That's the point. The question is, how do we get it to stop at client confidential information? How do we get it to only suggest the paragraph about the will without suggesting the confidential data, the confidential text that was in the previous client's will that is not going in the next client's will? How does it know? And that question hasn't been answered to my satisfaction, or apparently to Catherine's satisfaction. Catherine says they did say that it wouldn't be used to train foundational models, but they could not tell me it wouldn't bleed into other documents within my organization, and they could not tell me that it wouldn't pass outside the organization in some way. Dr. Steve says, I'm old-fashioned, but the extent that I want my file contents used by Microsoft is not at all ever, and without being too conspiracist, won't be used to train foundational models is pretty vague and oddly precise in a way that may not rule out much. A user named Rykar responds that these provisions in their online services agreement are similarly broad and vague in a way that does not instill confidence. We make no guarantees about how the online services operate. By using the online services, you are granting Microsoft a license of some kind. But the conversation with Ben continues. Ben then further responds, since you said organization, I assume you're talking about the business class Copilot. And of course, a lot of us are solo attorneys. We're talking about the regular Copilot. Who gave you that assurance, says Catherine. Can you assure me that it won't leave the client whose documents it arose from and emerge in other files? Who gave me such assurance? I can't imagine a scenario, he says, and he gives a slide about how Alice can see her data, but Bob can't see her data. Catherine says she needs the assurance that Copilot will respect M365 permissions and your data doesn't leave your M365. You can't imagine a scenario where content shows up in other documents. They literally describe such scenarios. It's the point. Of course, the data and the content should show up in other documents. We're not crazy about this. They're showing up in other documents because it's learning from previous documents and suggesting how to create new ones. That's the point. And we need it to not do that unless we know where the line is for client confidential information. We're highly trained at identifying client confidential information and keeping it safe from disclosure to other clients, disclosure to adverse parties, and even disclosure within our organizations. And of course, he confirms that's how it works. The link you're showing me is not your data just showing up elsewhere. It means that you could ask Copilot's questions about your organization's files, which I read to mean all of my organization's files, and it would try to answer them. Another responder asks, I guess what Catherine is saying is this: she creates a document for a client and nobody but that client gets to see or have any access to it. That includes Copilot. And Ben says, yes, we'll reinforce with customer support that they should reread the privacy doc, smiley face. Assuming the file was created in M365, only people, Catherine and presumably the client in this case, with permission to the file can access the file with or without Copilot. Catherine says, if I do a document for client A, can you certify that the response will never contain information that was originally found in the document for client B? please tell me whether or not it is currently professional malpractice for me to use OneNote. He says, I don't think so. Lots of attorneys are using Office with and without Copilot, and I'm not aware of any of them that have run afoul with the ethics regulations for it. But this is a change in the last 3 days or so, says Catherine. Are you intending that I rely on your representation that the presence of Copilot on my machine won't implicate my ethical obligations under RPC 1.6? And then I guess they take it to email. Ben says Copilot has been in the market and used by law firms for 2 years, and I'm not aware of any ethical issues so far. Well, that's kind of funny because the American Bar Association issued ethics guidance on it only on July 29th of 2024, not 2 years ago. Maybe they had something 2 years ago, but this was the state of it in July of 2024, and they are still concerned. Generative AI can create various types of new content, including text, images, audio, video, software code in response to a user's prompts. Some tools are described as self-learning. They may assist lawyers in tasks such as legal research, contract review, due diligence, etc. This opinion identifies some ethical issues with generative AI tools. One, competence. We've seen that. They are not competent to practice law. The generative AI tools do not know how to cite to law at all. But we're more concerned about confidentiality. A lawyer using a generative AI tool must be cognizant of their duties under Model Rule 1.6, which is confidentiality, to keep confidential all information relating to the representation of a client. Before lawyers input information relating to the representation of a client into a generative AI tool, they must evaluate the risks that the information will be disclosed to or accessed by others outside the firm. We must also evaluate the risk that the information will be disclosed or accessed inside the firm without adequate protection for the information from improper disclosure or use. I can immediately think of a few scenarios, and there's probably hundreds more, but imagine lawyer A works on a file, and the generative AI learns from all of the files, and then lawyer B works on a new client's file, and the generative AI brings something in from the original client's file that it did not think was confidential, and that lawyer B did not realize was confidential. And it gets published in a motion or legal paper, something published to the judge on the docket. The exposure of that client confidential data could cause lawyer A and lawyer B to lose their law licenses, be sanctioned, or at least have an investigation and a complaint by a client for violation of Rule 1.6. Messing with client money and messing with client confidential information is the fastest way for lawyers to lose their law licenses. Much faster than Richard Leibowitz's misconduct with the judge and lying to the judge and all that. No. It's much faster to lose your law license by messing with client money or confidential information. Because generative AI tools now differ in their ability to ensure information relating to the representation is protected from impermissible disclosure, this risk analysis will be fact-driven and dependent on the client, the matter, the task, and the generative AI tool to perform it. So every lawyer has to do this for every generative AI tool that they use, go through an analysis of how they're going to keep client confidential information confidential from the generative AI tool. Or you just can't use a generative AI tool that's built into your document management system or your word processor at this point is learning from your client confidential information and potentially exposing that information to other client files. The ethical responsibility is implicated no matter what. So Ben says that's not how it works in response to Catherine's question about using organizational data. It means that you could ask Copilot questions about your organization's files, like we said. And then Catherine responds, who told you that's how it works? And Ben says, oh, I probably should have pointed this out sooner, smiley face. He is the senior content product manager at Microsoft, drives a Mustang Mach-E, football coach, but doesn't seem to understand how client confidential information works. Mike Dunford asks, if content from one client's file makes it into another's, we have issues. And Ben asks, how would content from one client's file make it into another client's file? Catherine correctly points out, it summarizes, edits, and rewrites documents for me. No response. No further response from Ben. So he's probably frustrated. It did appear from his personal thread that he's frustrated with the rudeness of us asking such pointed questions. My response, a real-life Dunning-Kruger example. Amazing, the Microsoft dev should stop assuming he knows our professional responsibilities. What I think lawyers are looking for is reassurance that data from one document is never used to answer questions about another document. It's a huge ethics violation for us if it happens when working with client confidential information. So lawyers are concerned that Copilot, will learn from one client's file and suggest or draft to another client's file without the mental wall of keeping each client's confidential information separate. We lose our law licenses for mainly two things: messing with client money, even by accident, messing with client confidential info, even by accident. And here's where I'm disappointed. This is a real opportunity for Microsoft to help us, to learn from this problem. Microsoft is going to have to answer this question. The sooner and more maturely they answer the question, the better it will be for both them and the judges, lawyers, and clients that use Microsoft for legal documents. The ABA has issued a formal opinion, but the opinion is from before Copilot was turned on for everyone in Word without their consent. And they quote the things that I said before to you. Apparently, Catherine used to work for Microsoft, and she is upset at being condescended to this badly by a Microsoft employee. Catherine Boyle says it's gross and nobody wants this. My response was, hey, law professionals, Microsoft, we have a serious problem. Microsoft says your imagination is getting the best of you, winky emoji, and that I'm putting this in my file to show the judge the next time I'm questioned for not using Word. That does happen. Judges and lawyers circulate things in Word files, and one of the reasons we're concerned about Copilot is if I'm going to circulate something that I wrote about my client in Word, and I circulate it to a judge, does anything in Copilot come with that document? Is the judge able to ask questions about my edits, etc.? Probably not. I don't know. But I don't know. They should answer questions without being condescending. I don't think anyone was super condescending to him, maybe very direct, but he also chose to insert himself in the conversation and not... He could have stayed out of it if he thought that she was being rude, if he didn't want to address the situation. But he did want to address the situation, but he only wanted to address it with the hammer that he had instead of learning that this problem needed more nuance than a hammer. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting bit of learning for us on a Saturday. Now you know how to turn off Copilot, in theory, in Microsoft 365. I don't like the new name. But then again, I guess I'm an old person who's unable to adapt to change, which is not true, but still funny. So I'm not impressed with Ben Schorr's response, but there's a power dynamic here that I guess doesn't matter because there's nothing that Leonard French is going to do to make Ben Schorr behave better. So yes, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please consider supporting me on patreon.com/ljfrench or by joining the channel or by subscribing through Floatplane. And let me know what you think in the comments below.